Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves, because today we're unraveling one of the most bizarre, fascinating, and ultimately heartbreaking stories in the history of entertainment. This is the tale of a man who defied all odds, captured the hearts of millions, and then disappeared into obscurity. A man whose life was as eccentric as his voice, Tiny Tim. And trust me, this is a story you won't want to miss. So stay with us until the very end, because what you're about to hear is the truth they never wanted you to know. It all began on April 12, 1932, in the bustling streets of Manhattan, New York City. Born Herbert Kari to immigrant parents, a Lebanese textile worker, and a Polish Jewish garment worker, he was different from the start. While most kids were outside playing stickball, Herbert was lost in the melodies of old records. The moment that changed everything? A wind-up gramophone and a record of Beautiful Ohio by Henry Burr. He played it over and over, mesmerized. By the time he was 6, he had picked up a guitar, and before his teenage years, he was already strumming a ukulele. This wasn't just music to him. It was an escape, a passion, a destiny. But destiny has a cruel way of testing those who dare to dream. Herbert struggled in school, failing his sophomore year multiple times before dropping out altogether. His parents were worried. How would their son survive without an education? But Herbert had already made his choice. Music was his future. He took on odd jobs to support himself, but spent every spare moment devouring phonograph records and sheet music from the early 1900s at the New York Public Library. He wasn't just learning songs. He was studying history, mastering forgotten melodies, resurrecting a sound no one else cared to remember. By his late teens, he knew more about early 20th century music than most historians. And then came the moment his life took a turn. Hubert's Museum and Live Flea Circus in Times Square. A bizarre, dimly lit venue where sword swallowers, tattooed ladies, and even flea circuses shared the stage. It was here that Herbert, now performing under the name Larry Love the Singing Canary, found his first real audience. He was an oddity among oddities, with his ghostly white face powder, long curly hair, and an unforgettable falsetto voice. But it was here that he learned something invaluable: how to own his strangeness, how to mesmerize a crowd, how to stand out in a world that demands conformity. By the early 1960s, he had outgrown the dime museums and made his way to Greenwich Village, the heart of New York's folk scene. He performed anywhere that would have him: small clubs, open mics, and even the legendary Café Wa, where a young Bob Dylan was just starting out. But this was no meteoric rise to fame. No, his journey was a slow, grueling climb. Many nights he performed for nothing more than a meal. Then, in 1963, he landed a steady gig at Page 3, a club run by a group of lesbians on 7th Avenue. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was only $96 a month, but it gave him something invaluable: an audience that appreciated his art. Here, he perfected his ability to seamlessly switch from a deep baritone to his now famous falsetto within a single song. And finally, people started seeing him for what he was: not a gimmick, but a true artist. But the mainstream world wasn't ready for him. His high-pitched voice, his peculiar look. It was too strange for radio, too weird for record labels. Until one night in February 1968, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Tiny Tim, as he was now called, stepped onto the set, ukulele in hand, his long hair framing his pale face. And then, with a bright smile, he launched into Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Some laughed, some sat in stunned silence, but by the time he finished, no one could ignore him. That performance turned him into an overnight sensation, and suddenly, he wasn't just a novelty act. He was a phenomenon. The late 60s were all about pushing boundaries, and Tiny Tim fit right in. He wasn't just a musician, he was a statement. NBC executives weren't sure how he'd fit into the mainstream, but one man, producer George Schlatter, believed in him. And he was right. Tiny Tim became a recurring guest, each appearance making him more famous. Later that year, he released his debut album, God Bless Tiny Tim, featuring his signature song. It was unlike anything else on the charts, a collection of Tin Pan Alley classics and vaudeville-style tunes, wrapped in his signature warbling falsetto. And it worked. The album, Climbed to number 17 on the Billboard charts. He was a star. And then came the event that would define his career. December 17th, 1969, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. But this wasn't just any appearance. This was a wedding. Tiny Tim, 37, marrying 17-year-old Victoria Budinger, better known as Miss Vicky. It was a spectacle unlike anything television had ever seen. The set was covered in thousands of tulips, and Johnny Carson toasted the couple, not with champagne, but with milk and honey. An estimated 45 million people tuned in, the most watched episode of The Tonight Show in history. For that one night, Tiny Tim was the biggest star in America. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because fame, as we know, is fickle. As the 1970s rolled in, public tastes changed. The novelty wore off. And Johnny Carson, the man who had once celebrated Tiny Tim, began mocking him instead. Soon, his invitations to The Tonight Show stopped coming. Record sales declined. Reprise records dropped him. The mainstream had moved on, but Tiny Tim didn't stop. He couldn't. He started his own labels, Victim Records, then Toilet Records, but neither found success. He performed anywhere that would have him, small clubs, high school auditoriums, even punk and gay nightclubs. At one point, he joined a traveling circus, enduring a brutal 36-week tour. And his personal life? Equally strange. He had obsessive hygiene habits, showering 4 to 6 times a day, using only disposable paper towels. He spent outrageous amounts on cosmetics, not to look younger, but simply because he admired beauty. His relationships? Turbulent. 3 marriages, all ending in heartbreak. Even his most famous union with Miss Vicky dissolved after 8 years. By the 1990s, Tiny Tim's health was failing. Diabetes, congestive heart failure. Doctors begged him to stop performing, but he refused. Music was his life. On September 28, 1996, he collapsed on stage in Massachusetts. 11 days in intensive care. He should have stopped, but he didn't. 2 months later, November 30th, 1996, a benefit concert in Minneapolis. The crowd was small, most had already left, but Tiny Tim took the stage anyway. He played a few songs, then closed with Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Halfway through, he stopped, turned to his wife and whispered, "I don't feel well." And then, he collapsed. Paramedics tried to revive him. But at 11:20 p.m., Tiny Tim was gone. And that, dear viewers, is the real story of Tiny Tim. A man who lived life on his own terms, no matter how strange the world thought he was. He never fit in. He never played by the rules. And maybe that's why we still remember him today. If you found this journey through Tiny Tim's life as fascinating as we did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, there are more unbelievable stories coming your way. And if you're already subscribed, thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, stay curious. Because in the world of entertainment, the truth is always stranger than fiction.